All right. Hello and welcome everyone to Kubernetes new contributor orientation for November. Before we start off, first housekeeping item. If you were planning to attend the EMEA APAC session today, we do apologize that that session has been rescheduled to Friday due to a scheduling snafu. Uh, it was set up with the wrong time zone to begin with and didn't move with daylight savings time, moving to standard time. And then there was an off by one error in inputting the new time. So the EMEA APAC one, as I said, has been rescheduled to Friday, November 22nd at 10:30 a.m. CET, Central European time. Um, so if you want to catch this at another time, there is one other chance this week on Friday. Other housekeeping items. Firstly, this meeting is being recorded on and will be published on YouTube. All meetings in the Kubernetes community abide by the code of conduct, which you can find at the link on the bottom of this slide. It basically sums up to please be respectful of the speakers and your fellow attendees and generally be excellent to each other. Please use the chat to ask questions and have discussions throughout this call. There will be a Q&A section at the end where we encourage you to ask questions verbally if you would like to. A copy of these slides is available on GitHub or will be available after this call, and the link is also posted in the meeting invite. We will post the link in chat now if someone could grab it. Chris, could you grab the GitHub link for new contributor orientation, please? Note that on GitHub, these slides are provided as a PDF file. The links in the deck are not clickable as displayed on GitHub, but they should work if you download the file. The purpose of this meeting is to orient you in the Kubernetes community. That means giving you a sense for how the community works and what your part in it is or could be. And we will start off with a presentation to convey information about the community. Then we'll have a Q&A section where you're welcome to ask any question you would like of your hosts today. Hearing the questions that you ask can benefit anyone watching the recording, so please do ask questions verbally during this time if you're comfortable doing so. And now I'm going to pause for just a second and stop my share because I forgot to switch which host was hosting in the slides. That will take me just a second to fix. Thank you for bearing with me. Hello, I am your host today. I'm Caslin Fields, and I'm a co-chair of the Special Interest Group for Contributor Experience, as well as a sub-project co-lead within that same SIG for the comms sub-project. I'm also an ambassador of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. We also have Chris Short on the line, who is the other co-lead of the comms sub-project, and he will be available for any questions you have during the Q&A portion. He can introduce himself then, since I know he's busy finding that link for me. Now, let's dive in. The Kubernetes community is a very large group of people who work together to create and maintain the Kubernetes open source project. This is the most recent picture from just last week in Salt Lake City at KubeCon. Here are some numbers to give you a sense for just how big the Kubernetes community is. We track data about our contributors via GitHub and a few other contributor tools, and we collect them in a tool called DevStats. This is basically a big database of information about Kubernetes contributions, and you're welcome to explore it yourself. It's publicly available. These stats were pulled in November of 2024, and as you can see at that, this was just pulled last week, so basically now we have around 92,000 individual contributors to the project who've made almost 4,500 contributions. And for all of those contributions, we only have around 7,500 people with reviewing privileges. We'll talk more about what a contribution might mean and who a reviewer might be a little later in this presentation. Here's another visualization of just how large our community is and how fast it's grown. This graph from the 2023 Kubernetes Project Journey Report shows how we've grown from Kubernetes beginnings in 2014 to today. Ish. We grew from 0 to over 80,000 contributors in our first 10 years. Now, before we dive deeper into the community, some of you may be unfamiliar with what Kubernetes is and what it does. Kubernetes is an open source container orchestration tool. Open source means that it's made by people around the world, some of whom are paid to work on it, but many of whom are volunteers. And the code of the Kubernetes software is publicly available under an open source license that describes exactly who, when, and how the software and its code can be used. And the cool thing that Kubernetes does is orchestrate containers. Let's go over what that means. Businesses have many applications they need to run. For example, they may have a payroll application, logistics applications, or a company website. These applications need to run somewhere. So businesses also have a lot of computers to run these applications on. Kubernetes enables businesses to say, hey, Kubernetes, here's the computers I have, and here's the app I need to run. You can describe various levels of detail about how that application needs to run or the hardware it might need, and Kubernetes will run it on a machine for you. It also provides some handy functionality for managing the application while it's running. For example, it can provide some help for the process of updating the application to a new version. Exactly how it does all of this magic is what Kubernetes contributors work to maintain and improve every day. Let's learn more about how contributors build Kubernetes by exploring our community's structure. Kubernetes is an open source project within the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. The CNCF is a nonprofit organization with the stated mission to make cloud native ubiquitous. To that end, they support many open source projects that enable companies to run applications in the cloud. The CNCF provides a variety of guidance and support to its projects, including legal support, codes of conduct, help with logos and copyright, and more. The pyramid below the CNCF represents the structure of the Kubernetes community. At the top, probably interfacing the most with the CNCF and presiding over various topics that affect the entire community and project, is the steering committee. This body of 7 members are elected by Kubernetes org members. We'll go over what org membership means a little bit later. With a project so large, there are many different concepts within the project that need unique skills and knowledge. For example, the way the Kubernetes nodes, where workloads are run, do what they do is one area of expertise. Meanwhile, the challenge of writing and maintaining Kubernetes docs needs folks with different expertise. People who work on specific areas of the project gather together in what are called special interest groups, or SIGs. These break up the work of building and maintaining Kubernetes into more sensible chunks. Sometimes, however, there are big areas that need attention that are both very significant and cut across SIGs. Sometimes these are split out into what we call working groups. A working group is generally temporary. They're created to address a specific issue and then meant to disappear as a focus group once that topic is sufficiently addressed by ongoing SIG work. A defining characteristic of working groups is that they generally don't own any code or features, at least not in the long term. Working group work is either is or will be owned by one or more SIGs by the time the working group dissolves, unless, that is, the working group becomes a SIG, which does happen occasionally. But even the work of one SIG can be quite broad in scope. There can be hundreds of contributors in a single SIG, so SIGs further break down their work into subprojects. Currently, there are 24 special interest groups, 7 working groups, and 3 committees in the Kubernetes community. I set this up a couple of months ago, and it might have actually changed since then. There might be one more working group or something, but it's close to this. We can further group the SIGs and working groups by their scope. Some groups operate at a project level, and all other work in the project depends on them in some sense. Some groups work at the horizontal level, meaning that they have a technical focus that is both deep and broad and own core functionality from a project architecture perspective. Vertical groups have deep, specific technical focus that depends on the work of the horizontal groups. And of course, both horizontal and vertical groups depend on the work of the project groups. Here's a diagram of all the SIGs and working groups currently active in the Kubernetes project. To call out just a few, SIGs release and docs are groups whose work you might be familiar with, and they operate at a project scope. Though you may not have known it, you've probably encountered the work of SIG API machinery and SIG auth before. We consider these to be horizontal groups. And in the vertical groups, you can also find lots of familiar concepts like autoscaling, scheduling, networking, and node. You might want to refer back to this diagram later as you're exploring which groups to contribute to. Feel free to ask questions about these during the Q&A or in the chat now, but for now we're going to move on to talk a little bit more about contribution. Now you've learned the basics of how the community is structured, let's start exploring where you fit into all of this. First off, let's briefly explore why you might want to contribute. There are many reasons people contribute to the Kubernetes community. For some, their job requires contributing. There are also contributors who work with the community on a purely volunteer basis. There are also those who are somewhere in the middle, where their work needs them to contribute sometimes, but they also do extra work for the community outside of their job, like me. So, why do so many people contribute without getting paid? They may want to grow specific skills for their resume, or maybe they want to meet people working in the industry. Maybe they just think the technology is cool, or they want to dive deep and help build it. Or sometimes folks just like being part of a community of people who are all working towards similar goals. There are lots of reasons to contribute. You should think carefully about why you want to contribute. As you get more engaged with the community, you'll get more out of it if you can clearly tell people what you want. If others know who you are, what you want, and what you can do, they can more easily help you find work, opportunities, and connections that will most benefit you. So have a reason why you want to do this work and make sure that you tell other people about it. Regardless of why you're interested in contributing, you're probably wondering what it means to be a contributor. To answer the question of what it means to be a contributor, let's first explore what might count as a contribution. The truth is that any work you do to support the Kubernetes project is a welcome and valued contribution to the community. That sounds broad and vague, but it's important. There's a lot of work that contributors do behind the scenes to make this project run, and it's certainly not all writing code and making pull requests on GitHub. That said, it can certainly help to have some examples. Here are a few you might have thought of and some you might not have. For example, did you start off by posting a hello message in the Kubernetes new contributor channel in Slack? That's a contribution. Have you commented on an issue or a proposal for a new feature to share your thoughts or opinions? That's a contribution. Even watching or attending this meeting right now is a contribution, so pat yourselves on the back for contributing today. As a community, we try our best to acknowledge and appreciate contributions to the community in many forms. But if so many vague and varied things can count as a contribution, then what does it mean to be a contributor? There are varying levels of being a contributor. You might remember our slide earlier where we mentioned contributors and reviewers. This slide dives into more detail on what those terms mean. Starting at the bottom, anyone can be a contributor. If you do any of the things mentioned on the previous slide and more, you're already a contributor. If you contribute to the community in any way, then you might be what we call a non-member contributor. This means that you pop into the community and contribute likely in small, disconnected ways. But if you really want to get involved with the community, you might want to go for org membership. An org member refers to a member of the Kubernetes organization on GitHub. Being an org member gives you higher privileges to interact with the tools contributors use to do their work, like our prow bot in GitHub, which helps us apply labels and configure issues using GitHub comments. Having org membership is a sign that you're an active, engaged contributor who intends to contribute in a more structured way within the community. You're not just picking up a single issue or asking a one off question, you're probably developing expertise in a certain area of the project. You might be contributing to one or more subprojects in the SIGs in consistent, measurable ways. So you'll be ready to become a Kubernetes org member when the contributors that you work with are familiar with your work and will vouch for you as sponsors on your request for org membership. Beyond becoming an org member, there are increasing levels of trust, ownership, and responsibility that you could choose to pursue. Well, once you've been engaged in an area for a while, you might have enough knowledge to help review contributions or pull requests from other contributors. Eventually, you might be trusted enough to have the final say on whether some code is merged or a contribution is accepted and displayed on something like the Kubernetes IO website. Then you would be an approver. If you become a strong expert in a specific area who is highly trusted and regarded for your expertise, you might take on new responsibilities. You might become the person who others come to with questions, and you might lead triage sessions or other work for the area. At that point, you might be a subproject owner. If you're an expert who starts leading things in that area, you might also take on responsibility for various resources within that area and how they relate to other parts of the project. For example, you might take responsibility for the README file defining a whole subproject, which is where people could go to learn about it. And you might become the contact person who triages requests from other parts of the project. At that point, you might be a subproject lead. If you're leading a whole subproject, that's a considerable chunk of work within a SIG. You're probably interacting and collaborating with leads of other subprojects, and you're probably developing a strong sense of the mission, objectives, and ongoing work of the SIG as a whole. At that point, you may become a chair or tech lead for an entire special interest group. If you remember our community structure diagram from earlier, you might wonder if becoming a member of the steering committee would be the next step. But steering is an elected position. You can actually run for steering at any point in this cycle, but you'll be more likely to get elected the better other contributors know you and your work. This latter might seem like the one true path in contribution, but I want to remind you that there is no single path for your contributor journey. Most contributors end up contributing in multiple areas of the project. Some people even develop ownership in different SIGs at the same time. Just because you're learning and contributing in one SIG doesn't mean you can't check out another. Remember, most contributors are at least partially volunteers. Almost everyone contributing is doing it because they love it. So look around, find what you love, and just do that. It'll be much easier to do the work, and you'll be much more motivated to do it if you're doing something that you enjoy. Now you know the basics of how the community is structured and how you might fit into it. As we've established, you might already be a non contributor or non member contributor. But if you want to do more to contribute, let's explore where you can start. The fastest way to learn and make yourself useful will be to find a SIG that suits your interests and just start getting involved there. That might not mean immediately picking up an issue and writing code. Often, getting involved means attending meetings, reading notes and existing issues, and just generally starting to get a feel for what that group does. I also want to point out that we do have a Kubernetes Slack, which is one of the primary ways that we communicate with each other. And we also have the KDev mailing list or dev@kubernetes.io. So these are two of the primary communication channels that we use within the community. If you want to get involved, I highly recommend Slack for starting to learn and listening in on what different SIGs are doing and things like that. And then the Kubernetes developer Google group, dev@kubernetes.io, is where we put a lot of our community announcements. So make sure you join that if you're going to stick around. Let's explore how you can learn more about a SIG so you can find groups that are doing work that is relevant to your interests. So, where can you start learning? First, check out the Kubernetes/community repo on GitHub. In this repo, you can find folders containing information about each SIG and working group. When you click on a SIG's folder in the community repo, it'll show you that folder's README. At the top of that file, you'll find a brief summary of that SIG's focus area and likely a link to their more detailed team charter. That'll give you a broad, high level idea of what the SIG does. Below the summary of the group, you'll find information about when the group meets. Attending meetings is often a great way to learn more about who's in that group and what they're currently working on, and also how they do that work. Attending meetings is a great way to start getting to know the group of people that you're interested in working with, and for them to get to know you. You'll also find information about the SIG's leadership. Most SIGs have both a concept of chairs and technical leads. These leaders are at the same level of trust and responsibility, but likely own different types of tasks for supporting the SIG. Chairs tend to do more project management type work for the SIG, while technical leads tend to do more architectural leadership, like managing repos and certain kinds of technical decisions and processes. Each SIG defines what these roles mean to them, and each leader will be a little bit different. You'll also find contact information for the SIG. Most SIGs in Kubernetes do a lot of asynchronous communication in their channel within the Kubernetes Slack, which you can join by visiting slack.k8s.io. So slack.k8s.io. Each SIG also has a mailing list. Important announcements for all contributors to a SIG will go out to that SIG's mailing list. The mailing list will also be invited to all SIG meetings via Google Calendar, so you won't have to go to kates.dev/calendar as you might have for this one. If you sign up for the SIG mailing list, then you should just get those on your calendar. You'll also find information about where to find issues and PRs related to that SIG, and other information like the GitHub teams that are part of that SIG. Also, every contributor should join the Kubernetes Dev Google group, as we mentioned earlier, also known as KDev. This mailing list is the primary communication channel for important contributor information across the project. Checking out each SIG's folder will show you lots of information about that specific SIG. But what if you want to find information about all the SIG meetings to try to find one that works well with your schedule, rather than picking one by topic? The community maintains a contributor website at kates.dev, and within kates.dev, we have a page that has all of the information about all the public community meetings. Go to kates.dev/calendar to see a list of all the meetings. Clicking on one will bring up a new window for you to add the meeting to your own calendar. This can be a great way to get a sense for which groups meet at times that may work for you. Now you know how the community is structured, where you could fit in, and how to start learning more. You might also want to know if there's any actively open work that you could pick up and become a part of. We reach out to the SIG leads each month to ask them to share any current opportunities they would like you, prospective contributors, to know about. And this time we also have updates from KubeCon. On this slide, you can see evergreen opportunities. So these are opportunities for work that are basically always available, or which are available on a regular cadence. Currently, we have one that is available for pretty much any SIG you might be interested in. If you attend a meeting, most SIGs will request to have a volunteer on the call take notes. The role of this note taker is to follow along with the discussion and write down as much as they can in the notes doc so that someone who didn't attend the meeting, who would prefer to catch up using the notes, can do that later. So most SIGs have that. It's a really nice way to get started, and everyone really appreciates it when someone volunteers to do that. In SIG Contribex, we have a couple of evergreen opportunities. We have our SIG Spotlight blog series. So in the comms subproject that Chris and I lead, we have meetings for that group weekly on Fridays at 8 a.m. Pacific time. And we have an ongoing project of SIG Spotlight blogs. So we have members of our group interview the leads of different special interest groups and then write up what they learned about it. You don't have to know anything about the community. You don't have to know anything about the SIG that you are interviewing. The point is for folks who also don't know anything about that SIG to learn about it from your blog post. So by doing this, you get a really nice public-facing contribution, and you get to learn about the project at the same time. So do let us know in SIG Contribx Comms is the channel name on Slack, or join our meeting sometime if you want to take up that project. Another one is Kubernetes Contributor Summit staff. So this is going to be changing for KubeCon EU. I need to update these slides. We are going to have maintainer summits going forward instead of Kubernetes Contributor Summits, but there are still going to be a number of lead roles within the Kubernetes community, especially comms always needs help, and will especially need help this time. Because we're changing the format of the event a little bit. And so we need to make sure that everyone in the community knows what's going on with that. So if you're interested in helping out with communications about that event or one of the other leadership roles, do keep an eye out for Maintainer Summit stuff. If you join SIG Contribx or the Contributor Summit channels or the comms channel, we should be able to let you know what's going on there. SIG Docs also has a couple of evergreen opportunities. One is PR reviews. Anyone can review things. They also have a shadow program for PR reviews. So if you're interested in helping out with docs, reviews are always welcome and appreciated, and there are guides that can teach you how to do that, I believe. They also have a new contributor meet and greet just for SIG Docs on the first Tuesday of every month at 10:30 UTC. So you can check out more about that in the Kubernetes community repo that we mentioned earlier in the SIG Docs folder. Evergreen opportunities are great because they represent work that always needs doing, and which is likely well defined. But a lot of work is one off style. There might be an issue that needs fixing or work on a new feature. Many of these types of tasks require certain skills to complete. You might see an open request that requires a skill that you want to develop and think you should pick up that task to learn it. Be wary of doing that. If the task was easy for someone already in the SIG to do, it probably wouldn't be an open request. Many requests with skill requirements are open because no one in the community currently has those skills, so they can't teach them, or they may be open because the people who do have those skills are too busy and can't pick up more work, including helping others learn. But if you're coming into the Kubernetes community with existing skills like certain programming languages or specific technical skills like Linux networking or expertise in a certain cloud provider, these tasks could be a great opportunity for you to contribute to the community. So, this slide lists calls for help that require certain skills. If you're familiar with the tools or the skills listed, please reach out in the appropriate SIG Slack channel. So first off, in SIG Contribx, we have the Kates.dev website needs quite a bit of maintenance. We do have an open PR right now to try to address some versioning issues with some of the tools involved in running that website. If you are familiar with Hugo Doxy, we could always use more help with the contributor website. We also are looking for more folks to help with managing our mentoring programs. So within SIG Contribx, we have a mentoring subproject, and that project does a few different things. One thing it does is keep an eye on the mentoring programs like LFX or like Google Summer of Code, where folks apply to those programs, and if they're selected, they get paid to work on open source projects for a certain amount of time. So we need to keep an eye on what the dates are for those programs so that our contributors can submit projects to them and participate in them. So there's kind of some project or program management involved in that. Another thing that the mentoring subproject does is run mentoring cohorts within the Kubernetes project. So say there's a SIG that wants to train up some new reviewers. They might start up a mentoring cohort within their group where they try to help folks learn the skills they need in order to review PRs. So we can help folks within the community do things like that as well. So a lot of program management here. If you're interested in those types of skills or interested in mentoring, please let us know in SIG Contribx on Slack. Also, Electo. So, Electo is our homegrown software that we use to run elections for the community. As we said, the steering committee is an election elected position. There's also the code of conduct committee, which involves elections. So, we built our own tool for that in Python and Flask, and we could use some more help maintaining it. It particularly needs tests. So, if you're familiar with writing tests with Python and Flask, we could really use some help there. SIGDocs are interested in recruiting more blog reviewers. So, especially if you get involved with the SIG Spotlight blog series, maybe write a blog for yourself, then you could move into a blog reviewer role, and that would be a huge help for the community. There are guides in place that you can learn from. There's a style guide, content guide, information about how to submit a blog, and also a reviewing PR guide. So there's lots of resources to help you learn that if you're willing to contribute to the community in that way. Another thing for SIGDocs, really, this is more of an evergreen issue, is localization. If you are familiar with a language other than English and want to help make Kubernetes more accessible to folks who speak that language or read that language, then you can join SIGDocs in the localization community for your language and work on that. The ones below this point are from the Kubernetes Contributor Summit, and you'll notice a theme with them, which I'll point out in a minute. In SIG testing, they could use some help with PROW. They were particularly asking for existing contributors who use PROW to give them feedback on what they need for PROW and to contribute to making it better. There's also conformance testing. We recently, this year, I think, released a new open source project called Hydrophone, which is an open source tool created by the Kubernetes community for testing conformance of Kubernetes clusters. The CNCF runs a conformance program. You can ask questions about conformance if you would like to, and we can talk more about it. So we have this new open source project, and they could use feedback on the conformance testing tool, but they could also use a lot of help enabling adoption of this tool, helping folks know that it exists and what it does and why they might want to use it. So check out Hydrophone and tell your friends. In SIG architecture or SIG Arch, there's a general call for help. That area has a lot of, is very important to the project. It's very core to a lot of things that the project does. It's all about the architecture of the Kubernetes project as a whole. And so helping in that area generally means just a willingness to dive in and learn and develop the context to understand the work that they do, because it's very broad. So you would need to stick around and really learn what SIG architecture does in order to uh, develop in that community in SIG architecture. That's the help that they're asking for. They may also have good first issues and things available, but that was what they requested at the Contributor Summit. More. SIG Network, the Gateway API folks had a couple of calls for help. In general, they would like to have more folks helping out with building the Gateway API standard. So currently, the Gateway API is a custom resource definition. So it's not part of upstream Kubernetes, but it's kind of within SIG Network. It's kind of its own thing. Um, and it could use some help. It's very interesting to a lot of folks for a lot of different reasons. We basically consider it to be V2 of the ingress capability of Kubernetes. So very valuable project, very interesting implementation. The sessions for it are always packed at KubeCon. So if you're interested in it, highly recommend that you get in there and start learning about it. Also, they specifically asked for help with building the Ingress Nginx Gateway API implementation. So, Gateway API is a standard, and different providers or different environments can implement that standard. So, they're starting work on creating an Ingress Nginx implementation of the Gateway API. They're starting from scratch. So, if you want to build something new, they could use some help there. SIG release. So the release team is, of course, very important to the project as a whole. All of the work that Kubernetes contributors do 3 times a year is bundled up into a release and given to folks who actually use Kubernetes. There's a lot of work that goes into that process, and the release team is interested in automating more of it. So if you're interested in automation and you're interested in release processes, you should pop into SIG Release, say, hello, I'm interested in helping with release automation. How can I start learning about release? You are going to need to learn about releases processes before you can automate them. So it will take some time. And then in SIG security, I believe it was SIG security, there's a couple of groups that are kind of overlapping in the area of security in the Kubernetes project. But there was a call for help with CVEs. So, just like any software, Kubernetes has CVEs sometimes, and we need to be aware of them and work on fixing them, which often means collaborating across SIGs. So, the theme that you can see here, and I think that's my last one, yes, the theme that you can see here is that a lot of the work across the project really needs folks to develop context. So, the most valuable thing that you can do for the community is hop in and be willing to stick around long enough to understand what's going on in a certain area, so that you can answer questions about it and kind of generally act as a maintainer eventually, hopefully. And so that's all I have for open work items for today. At this point, I have a time check. We have roughly 20 minutes left, 22 minutes. So I can either go over common contribution pitfalls or we can start doing Q&A. Are there any questions right now? Yes, go ahead. I see a hand
Yeah,
raise.
yeah. Is it me? For me, is it correct? Yeah.
Yes.
So I have around 10 years of experience in developing software, but coming to open source, I'm like a college grade guy. So what I want to ask is like, for example, I wanted to contribute, and what I did is I found something, okay, which is deprecated. For example, IOUtil package, and I find download the Kubernetes and I start creating a PR. So is it something which which the community say that okay, this is good, you are doing this thing, or is it something that you don't like that, okay, let it be as it is, don't poke around, just useless stuff, not really useless, but something which is not really adding a feature to the actual project, but it is like kind of cleaner, but how do you feel it, like is it a good thing? uh, yeah.
So you found something that's deprecated. Are you trying to
Mm.
remove things about that thing, or are you trying to fix it so that it would be not deprecated?
Yeah. So, for example, there is a IO util package which was deprecated in, say, Golang, for example, 1.16 something, and instead of that, we want to use the OS package or IO package. So things like that.
You should
Hmm.
talk to the group that owns that first.
Yes.
The reason is, think about it this way, is uh, we showed the stats earlier about the number of contributions that we have, like 4.5 million contributions with only 7,500 people able to review those contributions. We had a session at the Kubernetes Contributor Summit about one area of the project where there are only 4 reviewers, and it's a really key area. And so that's a huge bottleneck in getting new things into the project. So imagine someone pops up and says, hey, you've deprecated this thing that seems really useful. I'm very familiar with it. I'm going to fix that up for you. As a reviewer who is already overwhelmed with things to do, where are you gonna put that on your priority list?
Okay, getting it. I should just start attending more meetings, and I will get my answer. Thank you.
Perfect.
Yes.
It may
Asking
be a
them.
really useful thing, and
Right.
it's great that you have familiarity to be able to do that, but just check with the folks who would have to review it so they can prioritize it properly. And Chris wanted to add something too.
Yeah. Like sometimes the best thing is just to go into the SIGs channel, say, hi, I'm a new contributor. I noticed this is deprecated. This is what I want to do. Right. And you might, someone might pick it up a couple minutes later, a few hours later, who knows? But you'll get a response of some sort with context around why something was deprecated, usually. So
Sometimes
don't
there are weird reasons for things.
Yes. And sometimes there's weird reasons for things that are deprecated but aren't fully cleaned out. And that could be the weird reason of having no time. So any work would be appreciated here.
Thank
Just
you.
make sure you're doing the right work is, I think, the most important thing.
Thank you.
Yeah, we don't want to waste your time and have you have a bad experience contributing because you're like, I found this useful thing and I fixed it for you. Why didn't you take it? Because no one
Right.
had time. Or because there was some other weird thing standing in the way that nobody ever talked about.
Yeah.
Any other
I guess
questions, or would
maybe,
folks
yeah,
go ahead?
maybe I have another question. Thank you for the presentation. I think at the end you were mentioning about building context, and I'm just wondering how much would you say you need to build up that context, or how much do you think you need to try to build it on your own versus like when is it the good time to start like attending the meetings for a certain SIG, for instance, or like I know I'm interested in SIG testing, for instance, but I have limited exposure to Kubernetes and I don't have exposure to Prow, for instance. So like, should I try to understand, should I read all the Prow documentation before attending the meeting, or should I attend the meeting first, or no?
So there's no bad time to attend a meeting, right? And you will quickly see what the priorities are. And, sometimes just showing up to the meeting enough times gets you into a position where you have the context and are aware of what needs to happen as a result of that context. And you
Okay.
can always ask questions during those meetings before, like the one you just asked, before you start diving into documentation. They might say, actually, instead of spending time on that, we really need your help here.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's
Also
just like I
considering
watched at least for at least for SIG testing, I watched a few of the meetings on YouTube uh, because I didn't feel like attending them directly. And I don't know, it looks a lot like a real meeting of real people who know what they're doing and like what you have at work usually. But usually at work, you build up the context because you work 8 hours per day with the same people, and then you just like it comes much faster, right? So,
right. Yes.
yeah,
That's why I say there's no wrong time to attend a meeting because you can get
yeah,
that context within 3 to 4 meetings, I feel like.
okay, yeah,
Now,
okay,
that means a month of
you
going to meetings without doing anything potentially. But like I said, just go into Slack and ask your question. You'll be getting an answer.
okay, yeah,
it is expected to be kind of overwhelmed and lost in meetings at first, but I always recommend getting involved with the meetings first and figuring out the words that they're using and the things that they're doing along the way. Think of it from this perspective. We have a lot of contributions and very few reviewers. The folks in that meeting have a lot of context and are talking to each other about the work that they need to do. If you go off and read the documentation, are you gonna finish that documentation and actually
Hmm.
get in and start contributing?
Mm-hmm.
Probably
yeah,
not.
probably not. Yeah, I
So,
know.
if you join the meetings and start meeting people and start having fun, hopefully, then you'll actually contribute, and that would be much more valuable to us than someone who has read the entire documentation.
Yes.
Okay, yeah,
And I will say this strategy worked for me personally back when I got involved in the project. Originally, I went to some SIG docs meetings and helped them out, but then I realized like their processes and procedures are very high, or I shouldn't say very complicated, but highly structured, and rightfully so. And I realized that like me trying to ingest all that while trying to learn about the project on the fly wasn't going to work for me. So I came back a few weeks later to contributor experience because I thought that would better align with my skills. And here we are.
okay, yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions now, or should I dive into common contribution pitfalls? Any preferences?
I think we just covered a pitfall.
Definitely. Both of these have
Yeah.
actually been related to the pitfalls, so
Yes.
I think
Let's
I'll
let's do that.
yeah, I think I'll go over those real quick. Do feel free to ask questions in the chat while I go over the common contribution pitfalls. And we do have 14 minutes left in our scheduled meeting. So I want to be cognizant of that. So, our first common contribution pitfall is what I call the good first issue trap.
Mm.
A common contribution pitfall is falling into this. The scenario goes something like this. You're a new prospective contributor in the community and you're excited to make your mark on the community. You find an issue with the Good First Issue label on GitHub. You think, great, I'll claim this issue, write some code, and I'll have contributed to Kubernetes. Let's back up a step. Once you pick up that Good First Issue, how are you going to complete it? I mentioned earlier that the Kubernetes community uses tools like our Prow bot to help us manage issues. Are you familiar with that bot? It's fine if you're not. Maybe you'll just start writing code, and those reviewers, approvers, and owners we mentioned will appear to make sure that the issue has the right labels and stuff on it. Once you've written your code, you'll also need to get their attention to review your PR. Remember, there's a lot more contributors than there are reviewers. When you make your PR, reviewers and approvers will be automatically assigned. But what if there are issues in your code? You might need to go back and forth with those reviewers on GitHub. Are you comfortable using comments and pull requests to see that work through to completion? Most Good First Issues get picked up by a new non-member contributor and never make it to completion. The code never gets checked in, and then the community has all these stale issues and PRs sitting around for the work that we really needed done, but the person got lost and ended up abandoning their contribution halfway. Then those reviewers, approvers, and owners have to go back through the process of triaging that issue and opening it again, or whatever else they might have to do with it. So you can avoid getting stuck in this trap by joining a SIG and sticking with it. When you know the people that you're working with and the goals that you're working toward, you can be a valuable part of not just doing the work, but making sure that the work gets done. This is a common one that a lot of people fall into at the beginning. Another one. This was a lot of information today, and this is just the orientation meeting. When you first join a SIG meeting, you're probably going to be overwhelmed. A lot of SIG meetings exist for active existing contributors to collaborate with each other on active in progress work. That doesn't mean you shouldn't join as a new contributor. You'll learn faster by joining these meetings and watching the process in action. And like we said, rather than reading the docs first before joining those meetings, you're more likely to actually stick around if you're engaged with the other people working on it. But it might mean that you feel left out and kind of lost the first few times that you join a meeting. Don't be afraid to ask questions by speaking up, asking in the chat, or asking in the SIG or subproject Slack later. They will be kind of just talking at each other because they're people who probably interact with each other all the time working on this stuff and have a lot of context with each other. But they're also probably overwhelmed with things and really wish that they had new people to help them out. They just are very focused on the work that they're doing. So if you insert yourself into there, then you'll be able to learn and eventually you'll be able to help them out, which would be really valuable. The Kubernetes community is a big, diverse place. It's diverse in terms of people, skills, technologies, and so much more. It might take you a while to find a place that clicks with you. There might be a particular SIG or subproject where you find more opportunities to build the skills that you're interested in and the connections that are most important to you. Don't forget that you can move around and explore other groups within the project. Most contributors end up contributing in multiple areas, and many find a particular area that they dive deep in. No two contributors have the same journey, so you'll need to explore to find the best places for you. Regardless of which areas you explore, we need your help, and we're glad you're here. We covered a lot today. Getting started in the Kubernetes community means learning a lot of basic tools, processes, structures, and more. Check out these links and refer to them often as you grow. A lot of these are in the meeting invite and also in the GitHub repo. Like I said, these slides, there are previous editions of these slides posted as PDFs already, and this one will be available a little bit later, probably before the Friday edition of this meeting. And now we are back to Q&A. One thing that Chris mentioned is the concept of cookie licking with Good First Issues. Do you want to talk about
Yes.
that, Chris? It is a good thing to point out.
Yeah, the no cookie licking policy, I think, is what is referred to
That's in
as, but
SigDocs. Yeah.
yes.
They have an official thing with this because they have
I
so much
know, and
trouble.
I'm not gonna do it justice, but basically don't grab an issue, do a little bit of work, and then abandon it, right? Like you can actually unassign yourself from an issue too. If you're like, whoa, I don't think this is good stuff. Like be sure to back out if you are working on a new good first issue and you come across something that you just can't figure out. There's no great undo
And
button, but the delete button usually works.
in SigDocs, they specifically have a policy in their group that uh, issues are not cookie licked when they're claimed. If there's an issue and nobody has really been working on it, people are welcome to take back over that issue. If the person is active on it, then they'll come in and be like, hey, I'm working on that. And then you could maybe work together to get it done instead of the person failing to get it done, as usually happens.
Okay, so Google AI gave me this wonderful overview, which is probably not right, but huh. Essentially meaning that contributors should maintain high standards of professionalism and avoid any behavior that could be considered inappropriate or unprofessional. I don't think that's what it's going for. So let me go find the actual participating in doc. Huh. Everything's missing cookie licking. All right, I'm not even going to try anymore. Sorry. Oh, wait. Hang on. Let's see. Looks like somebody put it in as a comment. SigDocs' no cookie licking policy apply. It's always okay for anyone to open a pull request to work on any issue, including this one. If starting work, it's polite to try to liaison with anyone who has already opened a PR or otherwise expressed an intention to work on the issue. So feel free to assign yourself to things as you see fit, so long as you intend to communicate and complete the work.
Any other questions or comments? We've heard in a couple of these that folks really relate to the good first issue trap. We've had folks on before who have fallen into it, and they come here and they're like, "Oh, everyone does that." It's true.
It happens.
Many of us have fallen into that trap before. It happens, and we deal with it. We have various processes in the community to automate the process of marking those issues as stale and making sure that they get put back into the flow, but it takes a long time.
Mhm. Yeah.
Any questions? We do have 5 minutes left.
I think
Okay,
Shakil
I
has a
don't know
question. Yeah.
how.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, not really a question, but I would like to share my experience. So, what the thing which helped me create a pull request, and to be very honest, I was studying 3 to 4 hour multiple links, even pages, same time, contributor guideline or PR guideline, and so many things. And I don't know which SIG to connect and all. But yeah, so what helped me really is that just going to pull request which are closed and looking at
Huh?
that how other people did it. So they did something, then someone either comment that okay, no, do this or that, or things like that. So the area which I was working on, so specifically searched that particular thing, that how other people have removed this deprecated package, and it gave me a good idea that okay, what I did also is the correct thing in a similar way. So, and I think in a project like Kubernetes, you will always find something which is already done similar. We are not, I think, always creating a new stuff every day. So,
I still do this every time I create a PR. I look for a similar closed PR to base my my issue off of.
That's a great strategy, though. especially if you're trying to pick up like style guides and stuff like that.
Other questions or comments? You're welcome to ask about specific areas of the project. If there's some technology that you're interested in, we could maybe help point you in the right direction. Tell us stories about the issues that you've faced in the past, or anything. Yay! Love to hear it. Thank you for joining. So, as we've posted on social media and such, these meetings are held once a month on the third Tuesday, theoretically, unless we mess up the time zones or the Zoom configuration, which we've done
Yeah.
both of now. So, hopefully, we'll not do again.
Check that box.
By we, I mean me. This is also a great time to mention that we don't expect perfection here in the Kubernetes community. Participation is more valuable than perfection. And someone added in here,
Oh.
looking for a signal boost for feedback on the vertical pod autoscaler that will help motivate someone's Kubernetes enhancement proposal. So if you want to do some impactful work here, if you're familiar with the concept of autoscaling, I could give you a overview of vertical pod autoscaling. Also, feel free to reach out to me on Slack at any time. You can DM me. I'm more than happy to help you figure out your way here. If you want to get some familiarity with vertical pod autoscaler and provide some feedback on some updates there's a link in the chat. 1 minute left. Last chance for any questions, comments. Going once, going twice. Thank you all for joining today. We really appreciate it, and we hope to see you around the community. Make sure you join Slack. If you need a review of any of this, you can find this recording on YouTube later. And as we said, we will put the PDF up. I will probably post in the Kubernetes new contributors channel on Slack to let you all know when those things are up. I should probably also post in Sig Contribx. I might start doing that.
Yeah.
You can always reach out to me. Thanks for joining today.